After helping thousands of players rank up through my guides, I've gathered 100 tips I wish I had known sooner and compiled them into this comprehensive guide. You may notice some unusual cuts as I've selected the best tips from every video that I've made over the past 4 years. So bear with me because this video has every type of tip, from aim to game sense to movement and agent mastery. I'll cover everything. And I wouldn't be able to do these types of videos in the first place if it weren't for the support of you guys and the coaching program that I've built. The thing is, I've built this program because even if you study every video of mine, figuring out what to do and how to fix your bottlenecks on your own can be very challenging. That's what we help people with daily, and the results speak for themselves. So if you want to see if you'd be a good fit for the coaching program, please check out the link in the description. Now, without further ado, let's start with number 1. Your goal in Valorant is to focus on taking one-on-one gunfights, especially ones where you have an advantage with better positioning or utility. When you have one enemy on your screen, there's only one thing to focus on, shooting the head in front of you. However, when there's more than one target, the situation changes entirely. The mental load of the gunfight increases as you have to decide which target to shoot first. The key is to focus on your positioning to isolate these fights in your favor, and not being overzealous by peeking out too wide. Personally for me, I tend to overpeak angles when I hear a bunch of enemies pushing up on me and I get overly excited. But whenever I play in positions where that can happen to me, I always tell myself that I'm just gonna go for one kill and back off to play numbers with my team. For most of us, being in an agitated state of mind is going to make you impatiently rush your shots, and it can even cause your hands to tense up so your aim becomes shaky. This would be the complete opposite of having calm aim that allows you to be methodical and patient with your aim, that allows you to take advantage of your rifle's first bullet accuracy. In an ideal scenario, you wouldn't want to queue up for ranked if you're having a bad day. But if you do end up queuing up and you feel yourself tensing up your mouse from stress during a game, take a deep breath and picture yourself trying to gently hold an egg with your hand. After a quick mental reset, try to continue to focus on what you can still be doing in game to have an impact. Almost everyone is familiar with the basics of crosshair placement in Valorant. The game offers plenty of visual cues for where head height usually is, so lining up a shot isn't typically a challenge. But what happens when we add elevation into the mix? Things start to get a little bit more complicated. When you introduce the y-axis, opponents can occupy a wider range of positions, making it harder to slice the pie effectively since there are no longer clear guidelines on where to aim. And I've been there myself, holding an angle from heaven, only to lose the gunfight in a way that feels frustrating. It's uncomfortable, and the margin for error grows as you struggle to micro-adjust your aim to hit the head. This is especially true when your opponent has the advantage of pre-aiming a more predictable angle. My advice for this is to avoid positioning yourself for these tricky gunfights whenever possible. Of course, there will be times when you have no choice but to engage from a tough spot like heaven. If that's the case, you can try to use more utility to isolate those gunfights and focus on pre-aiming the most common angles. But during the round, if you have the option, make things easier for yourself by choosing positions where your crosshair placement is more straightforward. Before a round starts, it's important to assess the enemy team's composition and anticipate the utility you're likely to face while defending a certain area. By mentally simulating the round and planning your escape routes, you'll be better prepared to focus on your aim. This way, you can anticipate the incoming utility rather than scrambling to react and finding solutions on the fly. However, even with this preparation, sometimes it can all just be too much. We've all been there before, mentally overloaded from shooting down a Sova dart, trying to dodge an Omen flash, running to avoid a molly, all while trying to get that one frag. If this sounds familiar, it might be a sign that you're overly focused on the enemy's utility, and your positioning could be the culprit that's putting you in unfavorable gunfights. You might have heard that the best way to peek an enemy is using the T rule, which is when you peek perpendicularly to the enemy's line of sight to maximize your movement speed on their screen. However, if you try to swing wide to peek an enemy and you accidentally brush up against a wall, your movement speed will drop even if you're heading in the right direction, which ends up making you an easier target to hit. It might also throw off your aim if you're not prepared for it. So to avoid these issues, stay aware of your surroundings and give yourself enough space when peeking. This way, you can focus on the fight without worrying about external distractions. The same thing can be said about other in-game mechanics that can affect your character's movement, such as tagging from bullets and agent abilities like grav nets, sage slows, ray satchels, stim beacons, and so on. So make sure you're aware of the variables that can affect your movement in your games so you can adapt your aim accordingly. Our mechanical skill is limited by the fact that we're human, specifically by our reaction times. The average human reaction time is around 210 milliseconds, and naturally, you won't always be reacting at your fastest in the middle of a match. Sometimes the enemy is just a bit quicker, and factors like ping and peeker's advantage can also come into play. And in some extreme cases, you might simply get unlucky. Every so often, you'll find yourself frustrated after lining up the perfect shot only to be taken taking down first. And when you review the replay to figure out why you missed, you might notice that the enemy moved just milliseconds after you clicked. It's impossible to predict exactly how your opponent will move, and even if you do react, you might not have enough time to adjust your shot. And let's not forget about bullet spread during first shot accuracy. If you've ever missed a shot on someone AFK in spawn, you've likely experienced this. Unless you're using a scoped in sniper or guardian, your first bullet isn't guaranteed to be 100% accurate, which can contribute to some of those subtle whiffs. The most important takeaway when you find yourself in situations like these is to move on to the next round and don't waste your energy getting upset or tilted. Just focus on the next round and keep going. Let's kick things off with the first initiator on our list, Sova. Everyone knows that his dart can provide a lot of info, and since the ability refreshes itself, the more you use it, the more information you can get. Right? Well, yes and no. It's a good instinct to want to use your dart often and early. However, it is also important not to waste it, especially since your dart can be a huge asset when your enemies actually try to enter the site. By using your recon as the enemy starts to come in, you have a much easier time defending the site. It helps you be more aware of everything going around you in case you get pinched, and it also helps teammates that come rotating in to get kills through smokes. Now, moving on to Gecko. A common mistake with this agent is not thinking enough about how to get multiple uses out of Dizzy. When moving up the map and trying to take space before you enter a site, there are a lot of places you can throw Dizzy where it can still provide value and be picked up again for later use in the round. In short, try to take advantage of that quick cooldown and don't be afraid to use your Dizzy as long as it's in a spot where it can be picked up again. Up next is KO. KO's left click flashes will always pop a bit over 25 meters. Using this knowledge in combination with the ping system allows you to pop flash any angle on the fly. Just ping where you want your flash to go and make sure you're about 25 meters away. Moving on to Skye. Have you ever used Trailblazer to scout a site only for your team to all be dead by the time you're done using the ability? Sometimes this happens because the dog isn't always the best utility you can use for your team, especially if your team is going fast or has already cleared some space. Try pop flashing instead onto the site through the smoke and being there for trades. That way you'll find way more value. Now, if you want to make Fade's utility feel more oppressive, it's important to know that you can force her C's to drop mid-throw. This is particularly useful when clearing out awkward common spaces like backside truck on bind. After planting the spike, throw C's over the truck and immediately drop it to create advantageous fights, giving you more control over the site. Keep this in mind when dealing with enemies in tight spaces. For our last initiator, we have Breach. And if you feel like enemies are turning from your flashes, chances are you're being too predictable with your flash placement. A quick tip to make his flashes more effective is to place them higher and in more unusual spots. The goal is to make the flashes appear in the corners of the enemy screen, giving them less of a visual cue to react to. You can even try to hide his flashes inside your aftershocks animation. Now, moving on to the controller role with Brimstone. If you often find that late into the round you no longer have enough smokes for a retake, it's probably because you're smoking too early. Since Brimstone only has 3 smokes, you need to be quite conservative with using them. If your enemies aren't hard rushing sites, avoid letting your smokes get baited out by just a single piece of utility. When deciding to use your smokes on defense, consider questions like, are they actually executing the site, or am I actively using this smoke to get more map control? The key is to always have a clear intention before using your smokes. Next up is Omen. To throw your smokes like a pro, take a page from 100 Thieves Bang's playbook. Instead of placing default smokes directly on choke points, try positioning them slightly elevated. This allows you to peek with a one-way smoke when holding down bomb sites, and it's a great way to become more aggressive and effective with Omen. Now for Clove. Clove is an agent that's often criticized for their selfish kit, and if you've ever had to anchor a site, I'm sure you've probably felt helpless when you got run down by a 5-man rush. However, if you're ever forced to fight alone, it's not all hopeless because metal is actually a really great tool. Compared to other DKs, Clove's metal lasts quite a while, making it an extremely useful ability to stop pushes, almost like a molly. So start using Clove's Q as a stall, and that should usually buy enough time for your reinforcements to come rotating in. For the smaller player base of Harbor, here's a tip to gain better control over your high tide wall. If you're having trouble placing your wall accurately, adjust your aim up or down to slow the wall's movement. This adjustment provides greater precision and lets you create sneaky pockets where you can position yourself for easy frags. On the other hand, Viper is a naturally sneaky agent, as a huge strength of hers is lurking, but only if you're using her smokes correctly. Her Poison Cloud and Wall are excellent tools for blocking enemy sightlines, allowing you to position yourself strategically for late round lurks. By doing this several times and a half, you can condition the enemy to expect you in certain areas, which forces them to waste more utility clearing these spots, even if you're not actually playing there. Lastly, for the controllers, let's talk about Astra. If you find yourself constantly recalling your stars and waiting for them to come back online, then it might be because you're often placing too many stars at the start of the round. Since your util can be deployed anywhere on the map, it's more effective to use most of our stars reactively while in astral form. Avoid having to deal with her 25-second recall cooldown at all costs. Let's dive into the Sentinel role, starting with Cypher. While it's natural to want to play passively and sit on site with him, doing so can cause you to miss out on other opportunities. Therefore, when you feel like you're not getting as much impact as you'd like, try placing more aggressive cameras or even trips to gain early intel or even early map control on where the enemy might be. Next up, Killjoy. Don't just use a setup because a TikTok video said it was good, but instead have a goal first and then come up with a setup after. Want to get early info? Use an aggressive setup. Want to play retake so you can guarantee the round with your ultimate? Make sure you use a retake setup. A setup is good because it helps you achieve a specific goal, not because it's a quote-unquote pro setup or someone said it was good in a video. Next up is Sage. I get it, you might be eager to pull off impressive plays like Grim, but it's important to be sensible as well. Grim walls are good because they're unexpected, and if you're looking to use Grim walls every single round, well, they actually become predictable, don't they? Sure, you can go for a wild play once or twice in a game, but if you're inclined to overdo it, it's definitely better to use your walls in more traditional ways. A kill on an off angle is nice, but if you can also use your wall for a free defuse or a round winning stall, which one do you think is more valuable? Speaking of off angles, Chamber is an agent where off angles should always be a consideration. When placing your teleport at the start of the round, you need to have a plan. If you plan to play aggressively, position your teleport so you can quickly move to a better angle after your initial fight. This is what I like to call a kiting setup, where you hit and run over and over again. Also, if you find yourself being forced to teleport before getting a shot off due to utility, look to switch up your playstyle. Instead of only playing static angles, hide and use your teleport to peek right after the enemies use drones or dogs, which can catch them off guard for easy picks. Now, it's typical that a Sentinel can hold your flank, but as Deadlock, it's almost useless to place a sonic sensor up to cover your back. Don't give your team a false sense of security, as enemies can easily shift walk through them. Instead, use the sonic sensors for the post-plant situation to interfere with the enemy's retakes. For example, you can place them on choke points where enemies will be coming in from, or you can put it right on the bomb, so when an enemy taps the bomb, it instantly stuns them. By using the sonic sensors this way, you can provide more meaningful support for your team. And finally, let's talk about everyone's favorite role, Duelists. Starting with Jett. If you feel unconfident when coming out of your smoke after dashing into it, it's probably because you lack information on where the enemy might be. When dashing onto site, it's a good practice to glance left and right mid-dash. This helps clear those close corners that your initiator might have missed, and if done correctly, this technique will reveal enemies on your minimap, and if you're still too scared to take a fight right after dashing in, you can also throw another smoke right below you to allow your teammates to come out and take fights together. Now, Raze has been one of Valorant's strongest agents since release, and you can make her even more powerful by using her satchels to peek. When enemies are positioned around corners or in close angles, throw your satchels before engaging. By detonating a satchel near the enemy, you'll disrupt their accuracy, giving you extra time to line up your shot and secure the kill. Next up is Yoru and his gate crash. Playing aggressively in one and done spots puts you a step ahead, but if you're getting traded out mid-teleport after a kill, try this trick. Unlike Chamber, Yoru can jump and teleport simultaneously. When playing aggressively, make it a habit to jump while using your TP. This makes it harder for opponents to trade you out, which increases your chances of survival as your head hitbox shifts upward. Keep this in mind before you decide to TP. And Phoenix mains, do you find yourself using your molly and wall to heal more often than not? Then you're not leveraging these abilities to their maximum potential. Oftentimes, these tools are more effective during set plays and executes, as they can clear significant space and make your role as a duelist easier. By learning a few simple molly lineups, you'll be able to flush enemies out into the open, which ultimately gives you more chances to blind opponents and secure kills. Next up is Neon. And for Neon, I see that a lot of players don't really capitalize off the fact that you can slide infinitely before the round starts. Neon is of course a really fast agent, but if you truly want to capitalize on her kit, you should be using her slides right before the round timer ends to get a bit of extra distance at the start of each round. It helps you beat certain timings, and if you really want to catch your enemies off guard, you can even decide to double slide. Now, when we look at Reyna, she seems to be the duelist with the simplest kit, but that doesn't mean her team can't get that much value from her flashes. In higher ranks, no matter how high or low you throw the flash, players won't have that much trouble breaking her flashes, which is why it's crucial for you to understand that you should always try to combo your utility with your teammates. Double flashes with Gecko Blind or Sky Flashes, for example, are extremely strong because it ensures that the enemy is either fully flashed while trying to break the Reyna blind, or they dodge the flash, but when they turn back around, the Reyna blind is still up, fully blinding them. And finally, let's talk about ISO. If you're usually sitting at the back of the team and finding it awkward to enter the site, it might be because you're not the most comfortable using ISO's wall. Here's what you need to do. While moving behind the wall, activate your shield and undercut to start applying pressure on the enemy. That way, you can safely run up behind your wall and get onto the site. If you want to take it up a notch, you can even combine your abilities with those of your teams, like a Sky or your Flash, through the wall, making you near impossible to deal with. The first key to becoming harder to hit is mastering the art of micro movements. What are micro movements exactly? They're the tiny adjustments you make to your position while strafing or holding an angle. By constantly making these small shifts, you become a moving target that's much tougher for enemies to lock onto. Imagine you're holding an angle, waiting for an enemy to peek. If you just stand completely still, you're going to be a sitting duck on their screen. But if you micro strafe just a few steps in either direction, your opponent will have a split second of misalignment when they peek, which gives you a better chance to react and win the duel. While it's crucial to master a variety of peeking techniques, it's equally important to know how to combine them with precise aiming to maximize your effectiveness in engagements. This is where the concept of the T rule comes into play. The T rule is all about creating a perpendicular angle between your movement path and your enemy's line of sight when you peek. By moving in a T shape relative to your opponent's line of sight, you'll appear to be moving much faster from their perspective, making you a harder target to hit. Think about it this way. If you peek by moving directly towards or away from your enemy, like in a straight line, there's minimal lateral movement from their point of view. This makes it easier for them to track your head and land a shot. However, if you strafe out perpendicular to the angle that they're holding, your character model will cross their screen much more rapidly. This forces them to make a larger flick to adjust their aim, which buys you precious milliseconds to line up your own shot. Now that you've got a solid grasp on micro movements and the T rule, let's talk about how you can take your macro movement to the next level by combining it with information from util usage. The key here is to use the intel you gain from your team's abilities and the enemy's ability cues to predict where opponents are likely to be positioned and adjusting your movement accordingly. For example, let's say you're attacking A side on bind and your Silva lands a recon bolt that reveals an enemy playing close right cubby. With this information, you can focus on clearing the left side of the site first, knowing that you're less likely to get caught off guard from the right. You might even pre-aim or pre-fire cubby as you entry, expecting an enemy to be posted up there. Similarly, pay attention to cues like Cypher camera placement, killjoy turret locations, and sage wall positioning to infer which angles the defenders are likely holding. Too often, duelists will get overeager and rush onto the site before their team is in a position to trade kills. Instead, wait for your initiator to use their intel gathering abilities before pushing up. Let your controller smoke off key angles before swinging wide. And always try to peek with a teammate to trade kills and maintain a man advantage. On defense, use your own utility to dictate the attacker's movement and create opportunities for easy kills. If you're playing Viper on Icebox, for example, you might throw a one-way smoke at B yellow to bait attackers into pushing through before mowing them down with your Phantom. Or if you're Cypher on Ascent, you could place a tripwire at B main to get an earlier alert of the attacker's push, then set up a crossfire with the teammate playing in market. The key is to always be thinking one step ahead and using the information you have to predict your opponent's movements. Protocols are the bread and butter of any good Valorant player, and they become even more critical when you want to go pro or join a team. A good way to think of protocols is as preset plans or rules you abide by while playing. So let's go back and imagine that we're playing Cypher. You can try to think of a good setup at the start of every single round and mix it up to be unpredictable. But if you do that, you'll likely make mistakes and eventually lose a round because of them. So it's better to prepare for situations you commonly encounter and have different strategies available. Now, that being said, just having the right protocols in place does not necessarily guarantee that you'll be invincible to off days. You might still be missing a crucial element, a proper A, B, and C game. So what's an ABC game, you ask? Well, it starts with recognizing that your performance is range-based instead of static. I'm sure you remember some of your best games and perhaps even how you felt during them. But if you've played more than a few hours of Valorant, you probably also realize that you won't always perform at that level. And that's okay. You just gotta learn how to deal with it. The biggest takeaway here is that you must recognize you're not a robot. Your performance is going to be a range. And if you want to improve the fastest, it's not smart to focus only on the highest end of that range. What makes the largest difference between players is actually how far their lower end makes their performance drop. If you ever feel that you need to play one or a few more games to quote unquote get your RR back, it's best to just stop right there. If that's how you're thinking, you're probably about to dive into a guaranteed C game, and anything you feel are hindering you from winning are going to set you right off. So unless you're trying to be a literal Minecraft creeper blowing up both your chances of winning and your mood, it's best to take a break when you clearly need one. Most players don't know you have way more time than you think to actually shoot someone. If you guys both pop up on the screen train at the same time to each other, you guys are both going to be surprised, and the calmer player is going to win the gunfight. The reason for this is that if you start shooting too early before your crosshair is even on the target, you're going to lose your first bullet accuracy. Even if you're not perfectly aimed for a headshot, it's far better to get your first bullet to hit the body instead of whiffing because you shot too early. The body shot will tag the enemy and slow down their movement, which makes it infinitely easier to land the rest of your spray onto the target. But if you whiff your first few bullets, good luck trying to hit the rest of your RNG spray on a full speed moving target. Peeling the angle is acceptable when taking space quickly, but it's the riskiest way to peek around angles in Valorant. Peeling the angle puts you in a position where you have to flick to a target that pops out because you either over-peek the enemy standing still or the enemy was also peeking out. This makes you very prone to panic spraying. However, you will die far less and convert way more kills if you learn to pre-aim most common angles and even off angles. That way, you're ready to instantly shoot if you see an enemy, and you're not completely exposed in the open if you do with your shots. Many people have asked me whether or not it's better to focus on your crosshair or the target when you're in a gunfight, and I'm here to tell you that each has separate use cases. When you focus on your crosshair, you're prioritizing precision and accuracy. You see the target being covered up by your crosshair, so you can see for sure when your shots will hit. On the other hand, when you focus on the target, you are prioritizing reactivity. So how does this translate to Valorant? Anything that requires precise crosshair placement will require you to focus much more on your crosshair than the target. If you're holding an angle or waiting for an enemy to peek you, doesn't matter if you're holding a common angle, off angle, or even holding an angle with an op. You want to focus on your crosshair instead of the target because you just have to click when the crosshair covers up your target. However, anytime you're in a position where you have to react to enemies possibly popping out from multiple angles and positions, it's better to focus on your target. Each gun has its own boundaries and limitations. It's pretty obvious we want to be taking close range fights with a judge and avoid long range fights. But players often overlook the weapon's first bullet accuracy, weapon recoil patterns, and weapon accuracy reset timers. The reason you lose long-range fights might not actually be your aim, but because your Vandal misses half of his shots in distances over 50 meters if you don't ADS. The reason why Dasner can get 3Ks, 4Ks with a judge and you can't is because you're not aware that the judge has a crescent moon recoil pattern. The reason why Royal G, who we've recently partnered up with, can hit Immortal with a classic, and the reason why your classic doesn't do what his does is because you're not waiting enough in between your shots to let your weapon recoil reset. Before we go over the next set of tips, if you're tired of seeing this on the enemy team and having to depend on decent teammates just to win, then you should check out the Immortal roadmap program. My team of over a dozen Radiant and VCT coaches will help find your bottlenecks and build a personalized roadmap to help you gain 500 RR in 10 weeks, guaranteed, or your money back. No amount of smurfs or bad teammates will hold you back, and you'll reach your dream rank like these other students. So if you're interested, click the link down below to book a free call with me or one of our coaches to look over your tracker together and see if you'd be a good fit. It's true that ultimates are extremely powerful abilities that can turn the tide of rounds and even games, but to be honest, holding onto them and waiting for the right moment can actually do more harm than good. The moment you use your ult, you can start working on your next one. So the more often you use yours, the more ultimates you'll be able to use throughout the half. Using 3 or 4 decent ultimates with a clear objective in mind will almost always be more impactful rather than relying on a single perfect ultimate where the stars perfectly aligned. This is especially true considering some players end up holding their ult for the entire half without ever using it. In short, don't be the type of player that only uses their ult once per game. If you have your ult and a decent opportunity to use it, just do so. Now, for the next 3 tips, I want to talk a bit about aim. First, your focus should be on your active aim, not your passive aim, especially if you're relatively new to the game. Your active aim is your aim during the middle of a gunfight, like micro adjustments, tracking, and spray control. On the other hand, your passive aim is your aim when you're not in the middle of a gunfight, such as your crosshair placement and pre-aim. When you're newer to the game, you should definitely work on improving your mouse control first, because those skills will naturally translate into having better passive aim for your pre-aiming and tracking during your crosshair placement. But once you've improved your active aim a decent amount, your passive aim will matter much more than most Valorant players think. The best raw aimers in the world aren't necessarily the best Valorant players, so don't stay too caught up in mastering raw aim until you've gotten really good at the fundamental aiming techniques like crosshair placement and pre-aim. In line with that, for our third tip, you want to focus on not getting into bad aiming habits, or if it's too late for that, that, focus on unlearning them. For example, you might be committing too quickly to fights by crouching, spraying, or zooming in for all your gunfights. Doing any of these things is a classic beginner's mistake, and it really hurts both your chances of winning and your long-term development. Instead of getting into those bad habits then, you should look to use tip number 4. Implement proper movement techniques. Shoot in short bursts and try to move in between them. Sure, at closer range, you might want to spray a bit more, but as a beginner and in death matches, you need to learn to fire a short burst, move, and do it again. Just keep in mind that if you are a beginner, you should try to use wider strafes in between your shots, because if you try to move and shoot with micro strafes, your aim might not be able to keep up in terms of tracking, and you could also be messing up the timing of your shots as you counter strafe. Next up, while being humble and recognizing that you aren't a perfect player is an important part of ranking up, you generally don't want to listen to the advice of your ranked teammates. That's because if you're playing in a rank you're looking to escape, the only people who can really guide you out of there are people who are more experienced than you and generally have a better idea of how the game should be played. Hopefully you won't take this wrong way, but if you're in gold, for example, you simply don't have the game sense or decision making skills yet that is required for the higher ranks. You might have huge misconceptions, you probably have some bad habits, and you're missing some crucial skills. Simply put, you don't really know how to play at the level of Radiants and Immortals, or even Diamond players yet, and neither do your teammates. If you follow the advice of gold players, then it's irrational to expect yourself to become anything other than gold yourself. A gold player can't teach you how to get to diamond, and a diamond player won't guide you to reach Immortal. For the 6th tip, you need to keep in mind that you always want to have a goal, or at least a somewhat clear picture of what you want to do in every round. When the round starts, most people are honestly just on autopilot. They blindly follow their teammates until the barriers drop, hoping something works out, and that's not good. Instead, you want to have at least a small plan. Maybe your goal is to grab an orb. Maybe you want to take some map control. Perhaps you're trying to get a pick in a specific area. What your goal is doesn't actually matter much, but having some kind of plan in mind is a great way to stay sharp and not lose track of the game. Now, for this next tip, I want to discuss a myth that's thrown around quite often: settings and muscle memory. It's often said that changing your sensitivity is bad since it ruins your muscle memory, but that's not actually true. As nearly all top aimers will agree, sensitivity and muscle memory are widely misunderstood in games like Valorant and Counter-Strike. The truth is boring. Changing your sensitivity is actually fine, and it doesn't matter much. In fact, top aimers change their sense all the time to help them with certain scenarios or to engage different muscle groups. So don't stress too much over changing your sensitivity when it doesn't feel right anymore. It's fine to do and not really a big issue. If you're not convinced and you really want to experience the effects of ruining your muscle memory, change your movement binds from WASD to your arrow keys or something similar. Then you'll quickly see what truly ruining your muscle memory looks like, and it's not even comparable to a sensitivity change.
Oh my gosh.
For this next tip, maybe you've heard it before, but I wanted to include it anyway since it's really important for improving efficiently. Try to avoid focusing on too many things all at once. Improvement comes from focused practice. If you want to learn a new skill, your goal should be to isolate it. Learning a new language while also trying to juggle and drive at the same time is how you cause a crash and how you end up making very little progress with any of those skills. Take things one step at a time and you'll achieve your goals much faster. Similar to the first tip, another important concept to remember is that you don't always want to follow what's right in theory when it comes to roles and decisions. Absolutely, it's true that duelists are the ones who should entry and sentinels are generally the best lurkers. In a perfect world, everyone knows their role, does what's expected of them, and everything works out as planned. However, the world isn't perfect, and I don't think you'd describe your average ranked teammates as perfect either, would you? If you do, I'm glad to hear it. You must get some great matchmaking. But for the rest of us, that means we need to adapt. If it's true that our teammates aren't perfect, we have to approach the game in a way that accounts for that. That means we shouldn't box ourselves in with theory or rules that our roles should follow on paper. Instead, try to have an honest look at the situation in front of you and make the best decision based on that. Is your sentinel failing to lurk? See if you can fill that role instead. Is your duelist not entering? Try to fill that void, even if it means you quickly throw down your smokes and run in right after. Sure, it's not your role on paper, but winning games isn't always about being right. It's about doing what needs to be done to have the most impact in the game. In line with the previous tip about discarding the rule book when it comes to roles, you'll want to do something similar for team theory in general. Oftentimes, especially for people interested in improvement like yourself, it's easy to fall into the habit of over-analyzing your games and giving your opponents way too much respect. While it's true that strategies like over-rotating or always rushing sites are predictable and easily countered, it's also important to remember that you're not facing the best opposition. Even pros drastically change their approach when they hop into ranked. They rotate faster, they simplify strategies, and in general, they don't give their opponents any respect until they show they've earned it. For example, while over-rotating is really bad when your opponents fake sights or have a strong lurk player, it's also a really good way to pick up some easy rounds if they don't have those elements in place. And to be honest, most teams don't, so abuse it. Now, this next tip might surprise you, but it's one of the most overlooked aspects of the Valorant community: learning about sports and performance psychology. Valorant is a mental game. If you feel awful, you're rarely going to play well. Luckily, there's an entire scientific community concerned with performing under pressure and boosting your mental game. In previous videos, I've discussed concepts like the ABC game to improve your consistency. There are great books about understanding and overcoming difficult emotions associated with high pressure decisions. I even recently saw a video talking about a tip discussed in the book The Inner Game of Tennis about pretending to be an actor who's acting out the role of a high level player as opposed to actually being a high level player, and how that can actually greatly boost your performance. Overall, there are a ton of excellent resources out there, and they're just waiting for you to take advantage of them. Now, these next two tips focus on improving your ability to trade kills effectively on both the attack and defense side. Starting with attack, trades are really important. Generally speaking, as long as you trade your teammates out, things turn out well on the attack side. As such, you should always try to play near your teammates, and if you're the one going out first, it's also important to peek in a way that allows you to be traded by the person behind you. Oftentimes, it might mean you'll be swinging out a little bit wider than you're used to, and that's because you need to peek wide enough for another player to peek alongside you. It's really common for people to forget this aspect and end up getting collided and double killed, so make sure that's not you. On the defense side, just getting trades is actually not enough, since that'll allow your enemies to plant the spike and likely win the round. As such, you want to apply this next tip. What you want to do is set up in a way where trades are guaranteed, but there's also a good chance of you fragging out without ever getting traded. Crossfires are great for that. Create bait setups with your teammates and make life difficult for your opponents trying to trade you out. This also means that, generally speaking, you don't want to go for something super aggressive without a clear plan, support from teammates, or utility. Aggression definitely isn't banned on defense like some of your ranked teammates might suggest, but you do have to go about it in a smarter way. Speaking of smarter play, one technique you should definitely learn to deal with op players and gather information more safely is jump peeking. If you haven't already, start learning the technique. I covered it in my 46-minute mechanics guide that covers and teaches every Valorant mechanic in the game. Another important skill to learn is recognizing when it's time for a break. If your last game was a tilting loss, take a breather and do something else before you queue your next rank game. It's really easy to throw away 200 RR in a single day by starting off poorly and continuing a bad streak. Something else you may not have heard about before is protocols and how they're really important for improving your decision-making skills. Protocols are basically pre-made plans for common situations. For example, in most pro teams, it's likely a protocol to discuss available utility before going into a retake. This helps them plan out their strategy and make things more likely to work out. That's just one example of a protocol though, and you can learn a lot of good habits and save mental energy by setting these protocols for yourself. Obviously, ones that require your entire team's participation might be tough to do in solo queue, but try to implement some basic protocols in your own games, like communicating your own util before a retake or playing passively when you have a man advantage. That way, I'm sure you'll quickly see your win rate increase. Now, you've probably heard videos say that you want to learn at least one agent for each role, with the idea being that you can fill whatever role your team is missing. But speaking without any filters for a second, being a selfless fill player simply isn't the best strategy if you want to leave your current rank behind. If you want to be a nice teammate, learning 1 or 2 agents per role is a good way to avoid weird team comps and tilted teammates. But if you just want to speedrun the rank ladder, don't bother filling and simply master 1 or 2 agents instead. If you want to climb quickly, it's all about optimizing your win rate. And there's no better way to do that than by getting rid of extra variables that come from trying to learn and master too many different agent roles. Another way to get better splits in your speedrun to Radiant is to plan out your progress ahead of time. Just be very practical. What rank are you now, and what do you need to work on to improve? Pick out a few things you want to work on, set a clear goal for each individual step, and in no time, you'll see that you've completed your roadmap and reached your improvement goal. This tip might not be for everyone, but if you're feeling hard stuck, it's a good way to measurably improve at the game. For this next tip, avoid being too predictable with your util. You can reuse util if your enemies don't know how to counter it, but as soon as something stops working, you also need to know how to adapt. For example, if you're a Cypher player, you've probably seen the trick where you crouch and place tripwires at head level. It's a good way to prevent enemies from sneaking past your trips without you realizing it, but it's also a quick way to get your trips shot out on sight. So as soon as that happens, make sure you change your approach. Next, This tip applies to any situation where you feel the time is running low. When the situation looks desperate and the clock is running out, don't be afraid to take big gambles. If you're in a 1v1 on attack with barely any time to plant and your opponent could be on either site, just gamble that they're not there and hope for the best. Time is a resource, and if it runs out, you need to respect that. Don't be the type of player who loses a 1v1 against an AFK opponent because you're too afraid to stick the spike. Do what you need to do if you have no other options, even if it looks desperate. Now, this is something I even see Immortal players forget at times, but you want to keep a close eye on enemy ultimates. Ultimates often dictate how your opponents might play. If you know holding site is hopeless because your enemies have 4 strong ults to take it, don't put all your eggs in that site holding basket. Set up for a retake instead. Like I mentioned before, however, you don't want to give your enemies too much respect, so there is an exception to this rule. If they're clearly incapable of using good util, don't assume they'll suddenly learn mid-match once they get some ultimates online. You might have heard before that to aim well, you must use your arm, wrist, and fingers, which is true. However, that's not the whole story. How you position your chair, neck, and legs when playing can also actually affect your aim in game. Take holding an angle as an example. If your legs are on your chair as you play, your chair might accidentally move or turn, causing your aim to be shakier and less stable. If you instead plant your feet firmly on the ground, or your chair doesn't have wheels, you don't have to worry about this, but the point is you'll have more stable aim because you're simply more still. And it's not just your legs that affect your aim like this. Different parts of your body can affect different aspects of your aim. If you lean forward, your neck might be strained as you play. This can lead to hypertension in your neck and shoulder, making you more inconsistent. So try leaning back a bit to relax your neck. You might also be straining your hips if your ankles are behind your knees. This can mess with your stability since your unstable body can make your mouse unstable as well, just like your feet on your chair. So keep your feet anchored more often and you might find your upper body being more stable, therefore your aim. People misunderstand precisely what mouse grip is the best because there are so many options to cook with your aim. While in my own opinion, claw grip is the ideal option out of the 3 primary grip types for Valorant, it's more nuanced than it seems at a glance. That's because, actually, when it comes to mouse grips, the most important thing by far is comfort. Being comfortable with the type of mouse grip you choose can make a massive difference in how natural your aim feels. Despite knowing the 3 general categories of grips, you might have a completely different way of gripping your mouse than the 3 ways I just described. If you want to find the grip that is right for you, just close your eyes, grab onto your mouse in the most natural feeling way possible. Then open your eyes. That's it. You have your perfect mouse grip. Again, don't worry if you change your grip mid-fight. The idea here is that grip just isn't something that you should force. Whatever feels comfortable probably feels comfortable for a good reason. Whenever you fight in an open space, you ideally want to isolate your 1v1s to get the best chance possible at a kill without getting traded. Primi does this after getting flashed by swinging into each player that's trying to clear him before they can adjust or trade him after his first kill. If he chose to only swing to one side of mound, he would be exposed to the other 4 other players simultaneously, rather than being able to isolate each in a duel. Part of how he's able to isolate these fights so well is his utilization of mound and his ability to counter-strafe burst. He doesn't stand still in any of his engagements, which gives him a clear edge even to the last kill. Utility cannot just be an essential tool in game for your team. It can also be a key tool for your enemies in gathering information. Every piece of utility thrown in the game gives something away in one way or another to your opponents. For example, if you're on Phoenix and you always flash somewhere before you swing, your opponents might be playing away from your flashbangs before you peek so they can kill you in the open. Instead, you can use your movement and aim fundamentals to catch them off guard with a dry swing or a contacted hold to kill them. It's easy to forget, but Valorant, first and foremost, is an FPS game, and every agent has the same ability to stop, aim, and shoot an enemy player. If you're weak in aiming, it doesn't really make sense to avoid that problem and just go watch a YouTube video about lineups for a new agent. That habit of looking around your weak aim to any solution other than training can hurt your progress and affect your confidence. So going to DMs, use a range, and try out Aimlabs or Kovacs if you haven't already. I highly recommend Voltaic and their tailored tasks to Valorant. I've suggested them before because they are a difference maker in your fundamentals of mouse control. The best part about this prepared confidence is that it doesn't just apply to a weakened aim. Try practicing an agent if you aren't confident or comfortable. Maybe there's a map you struggle with, so you can try to dry run clearing angles every day on that map until you are. You'll find that your preparation before your ranked matches can drastically make a difference in your confidence, which leads to better aim than before. When you're about to rotate, you first want to think, are they trying to end on that site? Sometimes the other team is going to want to rush the site, and sometimes the other team will be more spread out, looking to get picks or to take map control. You'll want to have different plans in mind depending on which it is. To determine whether the other team is going to rush or spread out, you'll want to, number one, look at the number of players that your teammates can see, and number two, look at how much utility the other team uses and how much of that util goes through the choke point. If you see 5 players, you can always assume they want to hit the site. If you see less than 5 players, then you can ask if they're playing fast or slow in the area that you expect them to split through. As soon as you start seeing utility thrown through the choke point, it's most likely a hit. Recons onto site, flashes through smokes, or players dashing out are cues that it is undoubtedly a hit. One of the most trustworthy ways to read a hit is if you see their lurker in the group. If their Cypher or perma-lurking Reyna is with them this time, then it's a special occasion. Expect a hit. When we feel like a hit is coming in, you need to decide if you should get to the site or if there's another play you can make. Until you have a read on the enemy team that you're confident in, you should stick to just getting to the bomb site. In this case, you need to figure out if the fast or slow route will be the best. Some other plays you can make would be to fast flank or look to catch out the lurker if they have one. Now, the third step to mastering rotations is understanding how team comps affect your rotations. If you have strong utility on the site, for example, a Sage, Killjoy, Raze, or KO, then your rotates don't need to be as urgent. If you're really confident in the util you have on site, even if they're trying to commit, you can play that as if it's just pressure, predicting that they'll get stopped and have to run back. If your team doesn't have strong utility on site, for example, they're holding with the Jet and Reyna, then your rotation needs to be much more urgent and faster. In these situations, consider canceling any plays that involve flanking or looking for lurks, and take riskier rotate paths so that you can get to the site faster. Take their team comp into account too. If their comp sucks at executing, for example, they have no mobility duelist, so they have Sages, Reynas, Chambers, etc., then you can be a bit less urgent. But if they have good agents for executes, you can be a bit faster. As the timer in the round gets lower, the attacking team will feel more and more forced to make a play. That makes sense, right? If they run out of time, they lose. Keep this as a rule of thumb. Simple. If the timer is getting low, you're expecting a hit, but your team doesn't have much info, then making a play instead of rotating can be extremely effective. For the 5th and final step in this video, we'll talk about some higher elo secret sauce. This is much more common in pro play, but you can easily take this concept for ranked games. If the other team plays with any discipline or structure, they'll play around their utility cooldowns. People like to wait for their initiator to return online before hitting a site. Most of the util you use to hit sites have cooldowns of 40 seconds. If you feel that the other team is playing together, you can pick one of these cooldowns, track it, and make plays around it. Ranked players don't like wasting time, and if they're already grouped up waiting, they'll be dropping that utility when it comes off cooldown. The easiest way to get value from this is to first identify if they have a habit of using the utility as soon as it comes back online. If the first condition has been met, you can look to make plays with your team if the util is close to coming back up and the map is quiet. So push one of the mains with utility. They're either there, ready to be killed, or you clear it and can be ready to defend the other site. Remember though, with this last concept, this is only going to work if the other teams are playing well off of each other. Did you know you can hide inside one-way smokes by going into astral form? You can't do this by simply standing in areas like Icebox 410 or screens. Instead, if you enter astral form while inside the one-way, it makes you virtually invisible unless the enemy pushes through the smoke. This is extremely risky and difficult, but can be highly rewarding if you pull it off. Now, Breach continues the trend of risky plays, thanks to a strange but unique use of his ultimate. Normally, you avoid ulting your teammates, but there's an exception if you have a monstrous Neon or Jet on your team. You can combine your ult with their movement abilities to launch them even higher and further than they could ever reach on their own. For Brimstone, he doesn't physically boost his teammates, but he can set them up for insane outplays with a creative twist. Instead of asking him to smoke an area and hiding inside of it, try asking him to drop his orbital strike on you. You can hide in the ult if you have enough HP and good enough timing. This is one of the riskiest moves here, but it can pay off in a big way. Brimstone can also do this for himself, though it comes with the same high risk, high reward. And speaking of bizarre, did you know Chamber can double pump his operator like a shotgun? While he can't build a city in less than a second, he can do something iconic that Fortnite is well known for. He has a trick reminiscent of the double pump strategy from that game. If you've ever watched the popular streamer Horkus play, you might have seen this tech before, but if you haven't, the idea is simple. You take a shot with your operator, then swap to your ultimate right away to have a faster time between your shots. So now for Clove, you may have never expected this, but Clove now has a supportive ability that requires lineups, and that comes with their new decay properties. But what exactly does this lineup look like, and what can you use as a reference to practice? If you've ever played Viper, Sage, or Vice before, all your slow and Molly lineups match perfectly with Clove's new decay. So you can look up old or new lineups from these agents and they'll translate one-to-one with Clove's decay. For Cypher, he's already a master of sneaking around the map.
Hello there.
But did you know he's also a master of hiding in plain sight? If you haven't already seen Acre the Dog's insane Cypher gameplay, he's mastered the art of hidden cages, or in other words, cages that you can hide in for outplay potential. A great example of this would be his Haven cage for A short. He uses his camera and cage to set up the perfect timings to backstab enemies rushing into A. Deadlock may not be as stealthy as Cypher, but she excels at punishing loud rushes with her sound sensors. Though many consider them her weakest ability, you can actually make them lethal if you place them through walls. The sensors will still trigger when enemies make noise in range, which can catch enemies off guard. A spot like under Heaven on Ascent can be perfect for easy kills. For Fade, she doesn't stall pushes the way Deadlock does, but she gathers info in a very unique way. Most Fade players guide their prowlers for intel, then swing on enemies. However, you don't have to steer your prowlers every time. If you let them run free, they'll still auto-target enemies and allow you to pull out your weapon sooner. And up next is Gecko. If you've ever found it awkward to use his ult and hold W while looking for enemies and trying to bunny hop, this tip is for you. A lesser known detail about his ultimate is that it keeps moving forward even if you don't press W. And this might free you up a bit to focus more on your strafing and giving you greater control over your positioning while guiding the ultimate. And now for Harbor, similar to what we talked about Clove, Harbor's Cove has the same lineups as Viper's Orb. So if you have any of those lineups in your back pocket and are interested in the waterbender of Valorant, you can adapt the same lineups for surprising plays. Okay, and for ISO, we found new value for ISO after buffs to his wall and vulnerable. One neat trick involves using ISO's wall to actually push through smokes more safely or punishing close range opponents. Take a look at this TENS clip for example. He scales up into the site through two one-ways, uses his slow wall to scale, and isolates duels way easier than he ever could with normal speed. And this makes ISO a better entry than ever before. Because the wall moves slower, you'll be able to see your opponent's character model sooner than the opponents can from their point of view. And the wall will even block some bullets for you if they try to shoot you too early. And moving on to Jett, she may be known for aggressive plays, but here's an interesting tip you might not have heard of. Across many different maps, such as Lotus and Icebox, Jett can actually fling herself into the air way higher than she should be able to with just one updraft. To do the super dash on Icebox, jump onto this box and push yourself into this line on the ramp by attacker spawn. Now, aim at this corner on the wall, and once the barrier drops, press dash and jump right when you hit the corner. If you combine this jump with her knives, you can get some insanely cool multi-kills and leave the enemies confused about where they died from. And moving on to KO, he can be just as aggressive as Jett in the right circumstances. Take his molly as an example. Because it activates in ticks, you can dodge the full damage if you leave the molly. But if it's your own molly, that means you take minimal damage if you step into it. Much like a Phoenix player going into their own molly, you can do the same as a KO with some crazy pop flash plays to punish through smokes and catch the enemies by surprise. Killjoy matches up with agents like KO because her mollies also align with other utility lineups. However, her mollies don't activate until you manually trigger them, which can create sneaky setups. For example, placing a molly by default on a site icebox makes it nearly impossible to stop you from popping it if you position it carefully. You can also place her molly in more vertical areas, but these are more accessible to break, so keep this in mind when trying them out. For Neon, her popularity has exploded thanks to buffs and rising stars like Temet and Kong. But here's a bizarre fact you might not know. Neon can actually updraft when executed correctly. The outplay potential is insane because most players won't expect this, especially from a Neon. To pull off this trick, push yourself into this corner, tap A and slide. While mid-slide, hit crouch. After about half a second, press W in the middle of your slide and this will launch you in the air. And for Omen, he doesn't have slides, but he can pull off some mind-bending outplays with this ultimate. Some of the best use is often attributed to Opium Omen, who uses his ult so aggressively perfectly that enemies can't guess his next move. Let's look at a good example of this from his clutch on Ascent. When he was isolating duels, you can see some pretty standard Omen tech. However, once he uses his ultimate onto the box for Heaven instead of TPing somewhere else like you'd expect, the opponent isn't sure about what he's doing either. However, if you think about it, Opium Omen is pulling the enemy's crosshair directly behind where he's positioned on Gen to get the clutch. If you can do this with your own Omen ults, you might find more success with it as a combat tool rather than just as a rotation tool. And this next tech for Phoenix is accredited to XTR. He popularized the wall pop flash that is simple yet effective. Instead of curving the flash around the corner, use a wall to shorten the distance, popping the flash directly on enemies with less time for them to react to it. It's similar to a standard flash, but faster and harder to dodge. A tool lots of time for Raze mains has to be the movement tech behind the Raze rocket. Players like Flights used to rocket boost themselves around the map faster than anyone else. This included using rocket boosts along with satchels to soar above the map and surprise enemies from behind. Reyna, on the other hand, requires perfect accuracy to get a lot of value. That's because she doesn't get to activate most of her kit without getting kills. But did you actually know that Reyna has some insane movement tech? When Reyna gets a kill and dismisses, her maximum speed actually goes up by 30%, and this allows her to jump way further than normal. This is especially useful on maps like Icebox, where the boost in speed lets you jump on top of boxes on A site that you normally wouldn't have been able to with a single jump. Combine the dismiss with her ult, your opponents will have a really hard time tracking where you're jumping to. Now, with Sage, she doesn't have this kind of mobility, but she does have the verticality on every map. For example, there are Grim Walls that can set you on crazy unexpected angles. But what about fake walls? Fake walls are walls you place so the enemy thinks you're standing on top of the wall, but you're actually in front of the wall, or you're hidden away and ready to punish anyone staring up at the wall. And speaking of looking up at the sky, did you know you don't always need to guide your bird on sky to land insane pop flashes? Many players think they have to wait for the enemy to get up close before swinging with their flash. However, just like Fade's dog, you can use free roam to your advantage. For example, on Sea Long Lotus, you can guide a bird over the mound and pop it behind cover. This lets you fight with your flash instead of waiting for enemies to move closer. While this isn't always the best option, pulling it off can create strange and awkward timings, and this can force unexpected reactions from your opponents. And here's an unexpected treat. Sova can also use his ultimate for movement. One of the lesser known methods is using your ult to position yourself on unusual vertical angles. Take Haven for example. When you have Sova's ult, normally they like to ult a lobby from sight or A-Link as a standard play to get kills. So if you do ult right away from A short, nothing will look suspicious until you see Sova on top of the short box after his third laser seemed to have missed entirely. And with Initiators, it's always helpful to have tricks like Sova's up your sleeves. And Taeho is no different. Have you been jump droning or just trolling? Well, you might not be aware, but if you jump spot with the Taeho drone, it actually has extra distance on where it can travel to. And on top of this drone is a vertical monster and can go over plenty of boxes you may have never expected. Viper, on the other hand, doesn't have any weird tech like Sova or Taeho. However, while you can't pick up the orb anymore, Viper is now the only controller left with custom one-ways for many maps. A great example of this would be her one-ways on Ascent. While she's not everyone's first pick, she can be an unexpected menace with one-ways on B main and in tree. And speaking of lineups, Vice is no exception to the lineup class of agents you can play. However, she can line up more than just her thorns. Did you know you can place the flash on or through the ground to throw off enemies? Take Fracture as an example. If you go underground as Vice, you can throw your flash through the ground into Generator or into the smoke there to catch your enemies off guard trying to retake the site. And with that supportive spirit in mind, Waylay is a unique case in the duelist category. She has a dive ability, a unique molly, and a dismiss like Phoenix's ultimate that puts her in the duelist class. Unfortunately, the reality of Waylay is that she struggles to entry in the same way as other duelists. However, that means she can support other duelists in a very unique and interesting way. You can put vertical duelists like Jet and Raze in a state of zero gravity to help them float longer in the air to use their ultimates and abilities more effectively. And last but not least, we have Yoru. He's the ultimate agent of deception in Valorant. He has fake TPs, fake clones, and fake flashes to pull your attention away from his real intent. That doesn't include the basic side of his abilities either. Did you know Yoru clones match what gun you're holding? Yep, that's right. You can classic out your clone, then pull out a rifle or shotgun to throw off your opponents in rounds they aren't expecting you to have a gun.